CAG had signed these reports probably sometime in March 2024. The reports have been laid only in February 2025, almost 11 months later. Now, CAG has to approach the Supreme Court for a review of this decision and review of the serious implications. Not only replies are furnished, records are delayed. In India's case, there is no written procedure. What are the qualifications for the CAG? How he is selected, who selects them? Nothing is available in public domain. About to be retired or a retired IAS officer as Secretary to Government of India is chosen to head the CAG. The Supreme Court in that case which you mentioned has very nicely given a way out, saying that CAG, if the subject comes for examination, he should recuse from himself that particular aspect of that particular subject. But does it really happen?
Today at Asianet News, I am being joined by former DG of CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General of India, P. Sesh Kumar. He has written a book called CAG Ensuring Accountability Amidst Controversies and Inside View. You can just talk a little bit about the functionality of CAG.
See, Comptroller and Auditor General of India is created by the Constitution of India itself. That is, there are articles 148 to 151 which specify about this institution. It says there shall be a Comptroller and Auditor General of India, and it describes how it's to be appointed, what are its powers and all that, what it should do broadly. It is perhaps the only constitutional authority which has got about 4 or 5 articles devoted to itself in the Constitution. Number 2, no less than Bhimrao Ambedkar ji, who is the architect of our Constitution, he has declared in the debates in the Constituent Assembly that perhaps the CAG is the single most important officer under the Constitution. That he said in the context of, without CAG's approval, our CAG tries to ensure that the executive or the government or the ministries, they don't exceed the expenditure approved by the parliament. So, to that limited extent, CAG exercises that financial control and accountability to the parliament. The third thing is there is another statute called CAG's Duties, Powers and Conditions of Service Act. This specifies in more detail what is the duties, what are the duties, what are the powers, what are the conditions of service, how his independence is ensured, his expenditure in his office is charged expenditure, that is, it is not subjected to vote by parliament. He cannot be removed from office except under the process which is adopted for the Supreme Court judge. His status, salary, everything is protected. He is equal in level to the Supreme Court judge. Plus, he has full freedom in what to audit, how much to audit, what to report. All these facilities and powers have been extended to this authority. And what does this authority do? He audits the expenditure from the Consolidated Fund of India. The accounts of the government are in 3 parts: of the Consolidated Fund, Contingency Fund, and the Public Account. The main account is the Consolidated Fund. So whatever money is spent out of that fund, it is authorized by the Parliament. Only after that, these ministries and departments get to spend. And how it is spent, whether it is within the limits that has been authorized by the Parliament, plus whether it is really yielding any results, outcomes expected out of such schemes, expenditure, all this is supposed to be audited and reported by CAG. Similarly, receipts into the Consolidated Fund, for example, income tax receipts, goods and service tax receipts, direct, indirect taxes, those receipts also, whether they have been properly assessed, any loopholes are there, any different type of treatment, inconsistencies in application of law is there, some loss of revenues are there. All these things are also subject to audit by CAG. Similarly, CAG also audits central public sector undertakings, state public sector undertakings, also appoints the statutory auditors of these government bodies, in addition to auditing the autonomous bodies, like urban municipal corporations, housing boards, DDA and all that. So this is the broad picture of the scope of the audit, how its powers are enshrined and his independence is protected and enhanced, and what is expected of him in auditing. And he submits his reports in the case of union government to the Parliament of India. Yeah. That means he signs the reports and sends it to the President of India. Procedure is like this. And the President causes these reports to be laid on the table of the House. Once the report is laid on the table of the Lok Sabha, then the report goes to the Public Accounts Committee. Public Accounts Committee is chaired by a leader of opposition, by tradition, by convention. So, and it has about 22 members, 15 from Lok Sabha and 7 from Rajya Sabha. So this committee examines these reports in detail, calls the secretaries to the Government of India for oral evidence and examination. These are all in-camera proceedings. Then it gives its recommendations on CAG's findings.
It's quite interesting that we are speaking at a time when a CAG report was recently tabled on in Delhi Assembly, and it pointed out at the irregularities in the excise policy, and it quoted some figure of about 2002 crore rupees. I want to talk to you about the amendment of the judgment by Supreme Court on 23rd of August 2024, which you also briefly described just now, that a CAG report is supposed to receive its finality only once the PAC considers it and submits its recommendations to Parliament. How justifiable this is, and do you want a re-examination of this? Because CAG, do you think, should have more power rather than being scrutinized by PAC first and then the procedure happens, the steps of any action to be taken against the irregularities or anything mischief pointed out by CAG?
See, this procedure has been followed for a number of years, and the Supreme Court has reiterated not once or twice. The latest you have rightly quoted, 23rd August 2024. So, in view of the Supreme Court judgment, that is the law of the land, whatever Supreme Court says. So it has to be followed faithfully. So there is no way that CAG can say that I will not follow this order, or the Parliament will say no, you can publicly, you can disclose your reports and go ahead making the reports public without coming to PAC. That is impossible. What is required actually is, see, this particular judgment and the implication of this judgment needs to be seriously examined by the CAG personally, number one, in his office. Personally, in the sense his office should examine, and they should take proper legal advice on how to proceed ahead. Because while deciding on this case, my understanding is probably CAG was not a party to this case. Without CAG being made a party, I think this decision has been given in a different case in Karnataka. Some CBI had filed a case and CBI did something on the basis of CAG's report. Hence, the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot do directly on the basis of CAG. Let PAC handle first the CAG report. That was the actually genesis. So now, having got this judgment from Supreme Court, now CAG has to approach the Supreme Court for a review of this decision and in view of the serious implications. Number two is, there is a possibility like media channels or public interest litigants or senior advocates who are interested in public welfare and accountability, they can themselves file a PIL in the Supreme Court referring to this particular judgment and how it could have an adverse impact on accountability, ensuring accountability through CAG. That is the second alternative available. But till such time that is done, I think CAG's hands are tied. He has to follow this procedure. Report goes to PSC and PST has to consider. But I think before you ask another question, let me also tell you, there is another dimension to this. This reports, once goes to the President of India, Lieutenant Governor or Governor, it is left to the executive government, the department concerned, the government of the day, when they will lay the CAG report on the table of the House for discussion, and then only it becomes public. See? So there, we have seen in many cases. Now in Delhi, you just take the instance. See, the CAG had signed these reports probably sometime in March 2024. The reports have been laid only in February 2025, almost 11 months later. Even in Jharkhand, recently in February, again, some 4 or 5 reports of CAG have been laid on the table of the House. These reports were probably of the 2024, again, June vintage, maybe about 10 months old. So the point is, should such wide gap of 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, be there between CAG's approving a report and sending it to the President or the Lieutenant Governor or the Governor, and finally placing it on the table of the House and making it public? On that also, the PIL, which I am suggesting, should argue and augment its case, saying no. because of these things, the implications of financial accountability, it has adverse implications, and hence this may be reconsidered and fixed some time limits reasonably, after which CAG can make the reports public himself if the reports are not placed on the table of the House. Perhaps this can also be attempted.
Right. So my next question would be about the regulations of CAG. For example, whenever there is any investigation or any audit happening under CAG, in your book you talk about few anecdotes where you were unable to fetch records from the ministries itself, and that led to the delay in the investigation and the audit. Do you think there has to be something done about this? Ministry is not producing record to an audit agency?
Absolutely, very fine question. See, this is a real concern of the entire CAG and IA&AS fraternity, IA&AD fraternity. Not only the records are delayed, they are actually not only replies are furnished, records are delayed, and the entire audit process is perhaps deliberately or maybe intentionally, it is trying to be sometimes hijacked, like it is to be, the process itself doesn't lead to results, with intended results. So they frustrate the audit. So this is a problem not only with one government, in many areas, many governments, state governments or central governments, ministries, some don't cooperate much with the requirements of audit. That is whether to produce the records. First is records are necessary. Without that, no audit can be done. Once records are produced, then the observations or queries come. They have to be replied within a time frame. All this is laid down in the CAG's audit regulations, but these are recommendatory and not obligatory. So these are not followed. And as a result, what happens is the entire audit effort gets frustrated. And without the cooperation of the auditee, no report can really be successful and, meant as it should be. But one problem CAG also has to keep in mind is this, CAG also has to go one or two steps ahead and try to convey the impression that it is engaged in a constructive process of auditing. And if it recognizes some good work done in the auditing department, audited entities, departments, ministries, it should not feel shy of bringing it out quite well in its audit reports and also highlight those positive contributions. And also the replies that the audited entity gives, they have to be more seriously considered instead of brushing them aside saying these are not acceptable. In international auditing practices, this is simply not done. And even the same CAG, when he does the international audits, he has to take into account the full replies of the audited entity. They don't delay things like this in India. That we have to note. And then he finalizes his report with recommendations which are agreeable to the auditee also, the audited entity. That is how the audit ideally should proceed. This is not unfortunately happening, which frustrates the audit process in India.
Right. It is very interesting that you point out that CAG must not only focus on the negative aspects of auditing or the irregularities which are taking place, but also should pay heed to the positive being done by the ministries or other agencies which are being audited. So I also want to talk about conflict of interest in appointments in CAG. We have seen in the past, and you talk about that in your book, former Defense Secretary appointed as CAG of India, former Finance Secretary appointed as CAG of India. There could have been conflict of interest, though court has clearly denied in its verdict that no, there is no conflict of interest and the person can recuse himself or herself from the activities which he or she was doing earlier in their careers. How do you look at it?
See, it's a very, very crucial question you have raised. I tried to answer this in a limited way in my book also, and you have picked up from there. I'm happy you read that part. First of all, thank you very much for pointing it out. See, this conflict of interest will always be there if about to be retired or a retired IAS officer as Secretary to Government of India is chosen to head the CAG or become the CAG. And it is inevitable, in some of the instances, that particular officer must have taken some decisions which may come up for scrutiny in his avatar as CAG. At that point of time, it's quite a dilemma for that person, whoever be that person, how to handle it. That is where the Supreme Court, in that case which you mentioned, has very nicely given a way out, saying that CAG, if the subject comes for examination, he should recuse from himself that particular aspect of that particular subject. But does it really happen? Does the CAG really recuse himself? How many instances of such recusal have been seen? Prior to 2012, we don't know. We have not heard of this principle. In 2013 only, the Supreme Court has given this judgment. So after 2013, if we say how many instances the CAGs have really recused themselves from subjects which they have handled in their earlier avatar and which they in the present avatar as CAG are going to examine, audit and report upon. So this is a moot question. It is left to the wisdom of the concerned person who holds the office of CAG. The practical implication is if he recuses himself, then who will examine it? See, it has to be examined by his deputy CAG. And the report goes and ultimately it is to be signed by CAG. Deputy CAG cannot sign the report. So it has to jolly well go to CAG for signature, whatever is the finding. So it is not an easy question to answer. There is no answer available. And as of now, no CAG has recused himself from any of the subjects he has handled earlier and which were audited. Probably the subjects are also not being audited so very strictly and very deeply, perhaps. That is also a possibility.
Seems like a paradox to me, and you nicely explained it. So my next question would be the kind of audit that is being done by CAG. What you write in your book is that it is authorized to do a post-expenditure audit. And the meaning that you talk about in your book, the meaning of controller, that seems to be misleading when you have an organization which is only auditing post-expenditure and not exercising any preemptive control. Then I think it's another dilemma that we're looking at.
See, this word comptroller, I explained briefly in my book also. You have read it, I'm sure. See, this pre-auditing function is not envisaged under the Constitution. The word has been borrowed and more a legacy of colonial, UK or US practices. So the word remains only a misnomer. That is what I tried to explain. There is no pre-auditing done, nor expected, nor intended. And
But should there be?
See, there are issues. Pre-audit is normally it's an internal function of the executive ministry or a department. There are trained officers and experienced in that field of internal audit. Those officers are deputed for that particular function within the ministry or within the government or within the department. So that internal audit function is definitely a separate specialized agency function. There are qualifications, international qualifications also. Such qualified people should be engaged or are being engaged by the concerned ministries and departments for carrying out this internal audit. So it is not correct to say that internal audit is not at all being done. The second point is, should CAG do that internal audit or pre-audit, if I am saying so? So pre-audit is not envisaged under the Constitution or under the DPC Act. So if CAG, there have been a number of attempts to involve CAG directly, indirectly, through pressure, through volition or through or whatever convincing the CAG to join the effort of the executive in the committees which take very huge expenditure or policy decisions, so that later on CAG doesn't come and say that this has gone wrong. And why? So instead of allowing CAG to go back after the event has happened and say you have done this particular thing wrong, they probably innocently, professionally, correctly, or with positive intention, there have been instances where CAG has been approached, requested, and tried to be prevailed upon to join this process of pre-audit. But CAG has so far declined very politely. In many cases are there. I can give a number of instances where those requests were done. But CAG thought that, in his wisdom, that it is not, number one, envisaged under the Constitution or the statute. Number two, it compromises his post-audit independence, which is his primary responsibility under the Constitution. Once he becomes a party to the decision, he cannot question the decision himself again.
So you also talk about that under one of the CAGs, there was a shift which took place wherein you were asked to focus on the implementation of programs and not on the policy making process. how wrong that was, because that is one of the reasons why the number of audit reports went down.
As I mentioned briefly earlier, it is entirely within the powers of CAG to decide the scope, extent, nature of auditing, and also what and how he will report on the results of the auditing done by him or his team. So whether you call it performance audit, you call it outcome-based audit, you call it 3 E's or efficiency economy, effectiveness audit, or value for money audit, compliance audit, or so many types of audits are there which CAG does. So what is to be done, where, in what context, how much, how deep, and what sort of reporting is to be done is entirely his prerogative, whoever be the CAG. Now, performance auditing is an internationally accepted, process of auditing, and we have strict guidelines. And CAG is a respected member of the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. There are standards, and our guidelines, CAG's guidelines, are framed in line with those guidelines. So it has been an approved process. These guidelines were approved for the first time in 2004 or 5. They amended in 2020. So this is a stabilized process. Now, what does performance audit do? In performance audit, the CAG can examine the basis or assumptions behind a particular policy. Whether inputs are properly taken, correctly taken, or something has been missed out, or something has been projected incorrectly, leading to a faulty policy. Because of the fault in the policy, the implementation also can be affected. So the policy angle can also be examined by the CAG. Whoever approves that policy, it could be the cabinet, it could be the minister, it could be anybody. So that can be examined in the performance audit, but only with the view of seeing whether the basis of the policy, the inputs going into the policy, are properly considered, all alternatives have been considered, and it's a conscious decision. So the second check CAG undertakes. In the case of outcome-based audit, what happens? You don't go into these aspects of policy. You simply go into the policy is given. So how it is implemented, what are its objectives, what were the outcomes expected, and how much of the outcomes has been achieved. And for that, he can conduct any beneficiary surveys, take some sampling exercise, and associate professional institutes, organizations also in his effort, and comment only on the extent of achievement or non-achievement of outcomes, with probably an analysis of reasons for not achieving those outcomes, or some other embezzlements or siphoning of funds or frauds have taken place. Those he will highlight in the outcome-based auditing. Probably in that period, there was a rethinking in the mind of the concerned CAG. So he tried to shift emphasis onto the outcome-based auditing. In that process, yes, some delay has taken place. Some reports already in the pipeline may have been, sent back for further scrutiny or further modification in the lines of the new approach. In this process, precious time gets lost. Already an effort has been made for 8 to 10 months or 1 year. In a particular report, it reaches CAG through a complicated, complex, and a very involved process, right from the field office up to the headquarters and up to the CAG. So once that report reaches and again goes back for an overhaul, obviously another 6 months, 1 year it takes. And again, updating is required of the entire data. So the delay is the one result of this shift in the stance. The second is consequently, the number of reports also come down. A new approach also to sink into to a team, to an entire establishment which is used to performance auditing so far. Suddenly, to shift to the outcome-based auditing, it has to change its guidelines, processes, everything, and tune itself also to that. That also takes time. All this must have taken its toll and may have contributed to the reduced number of reports compared to, say, 2011-12 period.
So whenever CAG picks up any audit, what is the criteria for it? How and why CAG picks specific subjects for audits?
Very good, fundamental, very good question. See, there is a process called risk assessment. Risk assessment means how important is this scheme, policy, or a particular intervention of the government, could be government of India, any government, for for larger public welfare, for the upliftment of poverty, for creation of employment, for providing water, drinking water, health facilities. All these are primary things which are topmost for the governments, which is where government spends a lot of money. So first is the level of expenditure which government spends. For example, there are so many schemes, about 8 to 10 schemes or even more of government of India, where more than 10,000 crore or even 20,000 crore per year are being spent on these areas. So these naturally become the topmost priority and high risk areas for audit. So these have to be taken up by CAG for audit. That is what he should do. Now, how many of these he is doing, how frequently he is doing, how late he is entering into the field, these are matters which only CAG can answer. Now, there are many reasons. See, it has also to be by elimination, process of elimination, or by high risk, low risk, medium risk, that type of thing, assessment is also done. So, high risk areas, they are depending on the availability of manpower and the importance of the subject. Goes through a process of risk assessment, guidelines are prepared, guidelines are approved, and it is discussed. There is a strategic audit plan, there's an annual audit plan. All these inputs go into that, and then subjects are frozen and decided to proceed ahead. But that doesn't mean that these are frozen for not being changed. If some other important item comes up in the course of the next year or so, maybe that additional item can also be added by sacrificing a little bit of the earlier items. So this process is what CAG has in place. Theory is there, guidelines are there, process is there, risk assessment is there. The challenge, the test is how far are these guidelines really being used, implemented, and what are the results? And what are the things that are being lost sight of or delayed or not at all taken up? This nobody knows outside the CAG. This is the problem.
Right. And so, do you think that there are certain reports which get more attention than the others? Some of the reports become national headlines, for example, 2G spectrum scam or coal blocks scam, but others, they never see the light of the day. Why is that? A part of it is because of the media, but still, we can talk about it.
You have rightly said. See, unless how does public come to know? See, CAG, as you rightly said in the beginning, CAG doesn't have the power to make the report public on its own. So it depends on the Public Accounts Committee. Only when it is laid on the table of the House, CAG goes and probably used to give some sort of a press briefing. It is not even a press conference. So only limited executive summary, what is contained in the report, that the press media is called and just briefed, and they are given a handout. Nothing is discussed in detail. That used to go on until about 2011, 12, and even 13 maybe. 14 up to 14. But thereafter, there has been a hue and cry. The same media which says, those high value reports and critical reports came in the public domain. One part of the media says that is not repeated now. One other part of media says, no, it was irresponsible auditing. CAG has gone overboard in projecting those cases and calling for press conferences. It led to policy paralysis. No decision has been taken. Genuine, sincere people have been harassed and even jailed because of investigation agencies. Everything has been cancelled by the Supreme Court. It led to chaos in the government and financial system. So, see, CAG's reports, especially those 2-3 reports, are supposed to have contributed to all this. Some people do say that, but the point is, similar things. The words presumptive losses and windfall gains, for the last 12 years, you have not heard anywhere in the CAG's table. The reports that are coming out of CAG's table. That doesn't mean that there are no losses, there are no gains or no revenue. See, even in this case, latest you have said about the Delhi government, some amount of loss is there. But CAG cannot say there is a 1 lakh crore loss when there is only a 2,000 crore or 3,000 crore amount he could arrive at. So it depends on the subject and the level. So it is not that CAG is not doing his audits, he is doing his audits, but that type of subjects are no longer there. All those coal blocks have been e-auctioned, spectrum has been auctioned. So all these major big ticket items, they are not anymore available for such sort of a examination and maybe commenting.
And I think these verdicts by Supreme Court, cancellation of licenses in 2G spectrum and in coal block scam as well, I think it all validates and makes us notice how important Comptroller and Auditor General of India is. So I also want to talk about the appointment of CAG in India. Do you think there has to be some procedural changes? Because right now what we have is the cabinet secretary, recommends few names, and then Prime Minister recommends it to the president, and then the appointment happens. Do you think that there has to be some change in that to have more transparency?
On this subject, there have been discussions for the last 30, 40 years, not now. Every time a new CAG's appointment or term comes, at least some of the very senior IA and AS officers retired, they do write some pieces in newspapers and columns, and they express their angst that, There is no procedure. It is such an important post. They're again referring to B.R. Ambedkar ji, जिन्होंने कहा था, it's the most important officer of the Constitution. And other governments, other countries have procedures and processes which are transparent. In India's case, there is no written procedure. What are the qualifications for the CAG? How he is selected? Who selects them? Nothing is available in public domain. Why don't we have, for such an important constitutional authority, a system similar to the vigilance commissioners or election commissioners who are constitutional bodies, where there is a committee and there is a process and there is a procedure, statutory procedure. Why don't we have that sort of a procedure to make it more transparent so that the appointment becomes that much more respected and acceptable across the board? But having said that, let us see that right from the beginning, the CAG has been appointed and he has been a choice of the Prime Minister. And Prime Minister is, after all, the leader of the country. So he has the backing and the support of the majority of the elected people. So hence he has become Prime Minister. And now, without the approval of the Prime Minister, without his concurrence or without his nod, how is it possible that CAG can be selected? So CAG has necessarily have to have the confidence of the Prime Minister. Nothing wrong in Prime Minister selecting it. And third thing is, if we have a committee sort of a system, there also it's not a guarantee that Prime Minister's will not be agreed upon. See, how is it possible that a committee of 3 people say that, no, we want only this and Prime Minister is not agreeing to that? So ultimately, Prime Minister, unless he agrees, that person cannot be appointed as CAG. Third thing is, see, what happens to CAG's reports? So it goes to a committee, and committee is headed by whom? It is by a member of parliament who is from the lead of the opposition party. It is not that the ruling party is sitting and deciding on CAG's reports. There are 22 members. Out of that, opposition party members, other party members are also given representation. Chairman is from the opposition party. So just because CAG is not appointed by committee, I don't think that would be a big problem. But in the interest of transparency, in the interest of objectivity, and to have a record and some additional sense of responsibility for such an important post, probably a procedure can be instituted. In fact, on this, there has been a public interest litigation also moved by some of the senior officers of our department in December 2023. It came to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court gave some time to all that, admitted that, but the government didn't submit its views on that PIL, and the Chief Justice retired. So I don't know what happened to that PIL as of now. It's still not. It is still with the Supreme Court. But then a new CAG has been appointed now. So for the next 5 years, probably that situation will not arise. So I don't know what happens next. But I feel personally, my feeling is that instead of questioning this lack of procedure or system or committee system, what we should aim at is we should have a multi-member CAG body, like the CVC or the Chief Election Commissioner, where at least 3 members are there. For that, a constitutional amendment will be required. That brings a little more transparency, more representation is there. The single person cannot drive that institution anymore. So that will be a little more broad-based, representative, and more opportunities for other people also to contribute to this great institution.
So my last question to you would be, we talked about appointment of CAG, but what about the oversight on CAG? And you rightly so asked that in your last chapter of the book, that who audits the CAG? Because you cite a lot of examples from different countries where they have oversight on CAG, but in India, we don't have this.
Yes, see, CAG's oversight mechanism is self-imposed. His expenditure, that is the expenditure on his office, is anyhow charged expenditure. So it doesn't sound reasonable or sensible to have audit of that particular expenditure. So there are 2 parts to this auditing CAG. One is the expenditure part. How much is he receiving, on what is he spending, and how is it spent? So some objective report from a third party is advisable, number 1. Number 2 is the other part, that's a voted expenditure. Charge expenditure, anyhow, nothing is required for that. For the voted part of expenditure, which is substantial, about 5,000 crores is the budget of CAG every year. So definitely some sort of a report is necessary. But CAG, what he is doing as of now, he brings out what are called performance reports, annual performance reports. In that, he gives a breakup on his own volition on what activities, on what particular departments he spends this money, and what is the trend of expenditure and all that. So broad picture is available to the public, to the public. But then this report doesn't go to Parliament in the formal way. It is an informal way of himself, CAG, voluntarily placing how he has spent the money, on what he has spent the money. He himself is saying. So there is no independent audit report on that. Third point is CAG is also now very much deeply into for the last 20, 30 years into international audits. So that international audits of United Nations, the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, International Atomic Energy Agency, World Health, so many institutions are there which he is auditing, and a very good name CAG has earned in that field. So there also that expenditure, nobody knows, how much is come and what it is spent on. The one argument is that it is not forming part of the Consolidated Fund of India. That's a fundamental question which needs a separate examination. All receipts which CAG does receive, one argument is it should form part of the Consolidated Fund, then he should get it voted and then spend the money. But since it's not from the Indian government and Indian budget, so he is spending it separately. This may have been examined in CAG at length, and this particular process has been followed. I am more concerned about auditing CAG's procedures, the performance auditing guidelines, adherence to standards, how subjects are selected, why subjects are not selected, how much time is taken in performance audits, how many subjects are dropped after taking performance audits, how much time is spent or wasted, how much resources are wasted, what are the lessons learned, what are the peer reviews, why don't we have external peer review? We had a peer review external only in 2012, long time back, 13 years back, 12, 13 years back. We didn't have any international peer review. The argument people give is international peer review. Those people come from Australia, New Zealand, or United Kingdom. They don't know our environment. They will write something silly and it will land us into trouble. So why give an opportunity? So let us not have it. But that is not the way for a professional, mature organization, which should take criticism in its stride and try to improve what it expects other institutions to do. It also writes similar things about the international institutions audit also. So it should also voluntarily improve its internal review mechanisms, including external peer review. And internal peer reviews, they are not disseminated, they are not on the website. Even audit advisory boards minutes are not on the website. So a lot more need for transparency in CAG's functioning is required. That is why I made the title of the chapter as who audits the CAG. Audit doesn't mean only the expenditure part.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for talking to us about the reforms that you envisage for CAG and its workings. And I must say that the book contains a lot of anecdotes for anyone who would want to revisit all these scams that happened and the crucial CAG reports and the environment during that time. Thank you once again. I hope that our viewers go ahead and read your book, which is a great insight for anybody who wants to know about the workings for CAG. Thank you so much, sir.
In fact, I'm happy you have read the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.